This is Jennifer.
And this is the Behavioral Plan Podcast, Episode 4.
Episode 4.
For this episode, we thought that it would be beneficial to kind of talk about special education. And that's a pretty big topic. So we wanted to narrow it down to talk about, sort of those early years. Prior to kindergarten, we're talking daycares and preschools and just what you're noticing at home and kind of like what you do kind of during those early years and what that looks like. Because for Jen and I, we really have lived that quite
handful of times.
Yeah, intimately with our own children. For a number of years now. So we're extremely familiar with it and thought it'd be worth
part of my brain goes to
conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the courses I took being like, special education is an outdated term. We use inclusive education. It's like, cool, but like everything is still written out as special education.
Yeah, I'd love that too. Like, I love that language.
There's
the
so
idea
much
of
of
inclusive classrooms, inclusive education, and that would be great.
And then it's hard because, like, in the same breath, I was called out for using the term my son being mainstreamed when we decided to put him into the school that we put him into. And that apparently is outdated terminology. And it's like, well, if it's the terminology that's being used with us every time we do an eval, every time we do like meet up with pediatrician or whoever the case may be, it's still the language that's being used. And it can be so confusing.
It can be confusing, and language has power, right? Yeah. And when you are using language that's outdated, when you're using language that is hurtful, that isn't person first or person centered, we know the effects of that. But also, unless somehow everyone gets
on the same page,
someone will be like, would you like to update your software overnight while you sleep, and now we all use the right language? That would be great.
Nice.
That would be so great. But that's not the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I use that language.
Yeah.
Right. I use the right language, updated language, as much as I can. When I'm corrected, I update my language or I take it in for consideration. And when I'm talking with schools or providers or families, I'll use what I feel like is the best representation of what we're talking about.
Yeah. I really wanted to bring that up because it can be so, it's tough any day, every day when you feel like you're constantly being singled out or put into these words or these boxes that have a negative effect. But especially in the beginning, one of the hardest things for a parent is to be told that their child is doing something different, or maybe they're not doing something yet.
Yes.
That's my favorite, like some of my favorite wording is like, well, we're not there yet. And it just really leaves open that
there's the
hopefulness and the possibility, like
just not yet.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to that. It's your point of view, it's your mindset, it's the language that you use. It's all important. But I also want to make sure that we're acknowledging that, like, us as parents doing this hustle, I don't always have the energy. So if I walk into the room and I'm like, inclusive classroom, using, language that is inclusive and what has been accepted by the community, and the person on the other side isn't, I have to tap into my reserves and say, is this the fight?
Right.
Is this the fight, and is this the subject for this fight? Because I also came in here to talk about my kid and why their needs are being unmet, or what's failing, or their complaint, or it's a new updated IEP, or whatever the case may be. I'm here to do that with the energy reserves I have put together for that. And now I got to add language on top of it. Like, it's one of those things where you just got to pick and choose. And sometimes that can be best done in an email. Hey, I noticed in our conversation the other day about my son or daughter, you use this language, and I just want to let you know that that language, it's outdated, it's offensive, it's discriminatory, whatever the case may be. Like, that's best done in an email. Save your energy.
Yeah. And to bring it back to education, a big reason for some of these talks on language is it's always changing, right?
It's always changing and updating, because we are as well doing better
and
changing with it.
Yeah, and it also helps me have to acknowledge some words here that are very outdated, and I'm sitting here going, but it also says in the 1970s. 1970s wasn't that long ago.
No.
Really wasn't that long ago. But in the 1970s is when the least restrictive environment was established, or the concept of it was established, so that the placement of children similar to ours would be better or more preferable in a regular school classroom setting, and they say regular, versus a special school setting. And so this whole idea of inclusiveness and not institutionalizing people that are different, not sending them off to their own classroom that's completely far away from everyone else, like all these ideas really didn't start happening until essentially the 50s to the 70s. So wasn't that long ago. But then there's also terminology being used like the R word.
Oh yeah, we won't even entertain it by saying it out loud in this room.
And it's used in some of the literature that
you will still see it in assessments and in evaluations. Yes. You'll still see it there, and then like for real, you will see it come out someone's mouth as if it is a medical term. Yep. And holy majoli, does that make me stop, drop, and roll into fight mode? Absolutely. Because like, if that word starts getting used, I'm like, well, this is not going to be a productive conversation. I'm going to see my way out. Not at all. I'm going to be talking to someone else from henceforth.
Yeah, like my daughter is not 2 yet. She went in to her first initial neurology appointment at 6 months. 6 months, 7 months, somewhere around there.
Somewhere like that.
And the paperwork had that as like a little checkbox for family history. And I just crossed it out. But in the other category, I had written autism and, other things that our family has. And she goes, oh, well, let's fill that in. That goes in over here. And I go, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And that's at Children's. So, no, it doesn't.
That was at Children's Hospital?
It was at Children's. Yep.
Woo!
So, I mean...
So would you know someone, if you're listening to this and you know someone high up on the Children's Hospital decision-making platform,
let's talk about
this. Tell them to update their forms. My goodness.
Absolutely. But I wanted to preface and start, this whole education process is sometimes really awesome and great experiences. Sometimes you will feel alone. You will feel like your child is not being treated fairly. You're gonna maybe be told things that are inaccurate and not helpful whatsoever. Just really depends on, it's like the lottery. Really depends on who gets assigned to you, what your support system looks like, and the endless amount of paperwork and advocating you will be doing.
Yeah, and it's confusing.
It's
like the amount of conversations I've had with people on the phone for various reasons, whether it was on the medical side, on the county side, on the school side, the district side, like every single person I've talked to, I'm like, man, is this just like intentionally confusing? Is this set up to just like make me want to rip up my papers and throw them up in the air and say no more? Like, because this is like if this wasn't my kid, this was like my cat, I wouldn't even bother, because the information doesn't have to be that confusing, and the process doesn't have to be that confusing, and the fact that each of these little areas operate on their own little island without cross communicating. Like, this might be a different episode where we go on this tangent, but like the fact that like once your child has a medical diagnosis, it shouldn't matter anywhere else. That is the golden ticket. You opened up your little chocolate bar, you got the golden ticket, you got your diagnosis, it should count everywhere. No reassessments needed. Evaluations to see where your child's at and the supports they need now, sure. But an assessment for someone else who's not in the medical field to say, I confirm your medical diagnosis. Like, no, step off. Like, I have that already. Let's speed up this process, because maybe it didn't need to take 13 months to get SMART certified when I had a diagnosis that whole time. Maybe it didn't need to take 13 months to get SMART certified, which is SMRT, and it's the certification you get when your child has a disability and you register them with that disability in your state. And you need it for a lot of things, and it took 13 months to do. Why? I don't know. It's a great county that we were working with, Dakota County. Shout out to Dakota County. It's a great county.
Right.
But it took so long. And that whole entire time, he had his ADHD diagnosis and he had his autism diagnosis. So I just sort of feel like the only thing that person needed to do was go, can you give me the medical diagnosis paperwork? And I go, yes, ka-ching, here you go. And then they look at it and go, accurate, certified, like everything about it, blah blah blah, and SMART certified. Sure, done.
Could be.
See you in 3 years.
Or you could be in a situation where your child access person is the most badass fight for your children human being that I have ever met in the process of contacting people. She helps me with both my kiddos right now, and I'll just say, she was like, here, next step, call so-and-so. You're gonna request a referral for the SMART certification. Granted, I've already done this before. Call them. Cool, we need this, SMART certification. Well, we can't do that. Or why? My daughter's autistic. That doesn't qualify them. Sure does. Sure does.
Funny.
So I had to explain what resources we were hoping to start receiving in order for them to accept whether or not she would be SMART certified.
What?
So I went back to my child access person. I'm like, literally,
make it make
on
sense.
the phone with whatever these people are, easy info people, whoever, talking to them. Very nice lady, but clearly, like, she kept asking her supervisor for help. She was like, I don't understand what's going on. Go back to my lady as I'm still on the phone, just emailing her, because I know she's checking her emails, because she has helped me in last minute situations often. Sure. And she's like, what is going on? I'm like, I'm about to lose my mind here. So she told me all the pretty things to say. I said them over here. We figured it out. Go back to then chit chat about our experience, and my child access lady was just like, I know they have a new system, but like, we don't communicate with one another, and here we have new systems and nobody knows what's going on. So if you think you're going crazy and everything is a long wait list and all this craziness, which it is 9 times out of 10, it's because there's so many different interpretations of policies and interpretations of what things are supposed to be, that each county kind of does like their own little something. It's really annoying.
It's frustrating because you're already having to hustle pretty hard for your kid just on a day-to-day level.
Yeah.
And then you got to do all this back, because a lot of these things, they're for the immediate need, but also for future needs too. Mm-hmm. And like, it's more than one person can do.
Yeah.
But special education services, much like in our first episode when we were talking about a behavioral plan and how sometimes that's your first, for a lot of families, that's when you kind of first get hey, so there's a behavioral thing going on inside the classroom, and it could be like your first time hearing that something's going on with your kid. Another way, especially in the state of Minnesota, another way that you could be alerted that something might be going on with your kid between the ages of I'm going to say birth, but really it's not birth, but between the ages of birth and kindergarten is when they're in a daycare setting or a preschool setting, and someone says, hey, we need to contact Help Me Grow. Mm-hmm. Or maybe your pediatrician says, hey, I'm noticing some stuff. And then you express we're having a lot of challenges with behavior things and with their daycare provider and with their preschool or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's we can't keep a babysitter. Whatever your situation is, Help Me Grow might be another way that you end up being oh, something might be going on here with my kid. And Help Me Grow can connect you to early childhood special education, where you get they'll come in and they'll assess your kid, or they'll set up an appointment with your kid, and you'll go through this assessment process. And they have their own team of people that they do. They'll have a psychologist, a speech therapist,
OT,
an OT person,
PT sometimes.
A nurse,
it depends.
A school nurse.
Yeah, it depends on that initial phone call and what makes sense for your kid's situation. Because I know for my 8-year-old, it was the speech pathologist, whereas for my daughter, it was an OT person that came.
Sure.
So it just kind of depends on.
Right. And for my 6-year-old, he was 3 at the time when his preschool that he was at, we were going through, because my 6-year-old was born with HIE, which is a traumatic brain injury. It's a lack of oxygen upon birth. And it resulted in brain trauma or brain damage to his frontal lobe. And then we just he had these post-NICU follow-up appointments through the mHealth Fairview clinic, and so he got assessed regularly just to kind of keep an eye on him, see if anything was gonna come up delay-wise, do routine IQ tests and stuff like that. And so we finally got to the point where it was he was 3, and I was boy, oh boy, we've got some things going on here. And so he was actively seeing the Birth to 3 clinic at the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain. He was also doing his post-NICU follow-up stuff there. And then we did a trial or a study through the Masonic Institute as well, through the autism clinic and the integrative. Oh, these are my people and I'm not remembering them. Anyway, we did a study where it involved him getting a partial assessment for autism, and if he kind of qualified then for there, he got invited to do the full assessment a year later. Anyway, so a little backstory there. And they were great. This whole the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain, I highly recommend. If you're looking for a place for your child to get care, receive care, look up their website, give them a call, tell them your situation, and I bet you there's a department that you can be pointed to, or 1,000%. Even a study that then you get paid to participate in, which is amazing. But anyway, my little plug, because I love those people there.
Well, and because a lot of places will not see you. This was our struggle. A lot of places will not see you if your child is considered too young.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so with us, we were being dismissed, even with certain resources that we do recommend, still to this day, because it is helpful if it's the right fit for you and your family.
Yeah.
but my daughter was getting dismissed because, oh, she's just too young. It's like you don't see autism at the age of 1. Like, I'm sorry, I saw it at the age of 6 months. Like, I get she's a female. I get you typically don't like to start doing a lot of that stuff until they're a little bit older, but like when you know, you know.
Yeah, and they don't want to give a diagnosis and then take it
No.
away, and I get that too.
Yeah.
And so I think, but there's
Masonic
got to be a balance,
has
right? And Masonic does
studies.
this, where they're like, we hear you, we see you, bring them in, we'll tell you
Yes.
what we're seeing. We'll give you advice and resources of what you can do right now, and then we'll invite you back in a year. Let's take another look at that
Yes.
point. And it validates you as a parent.
It
They
does.
trust that like you are the one person who knows your child best.
Mhm.
So anyway, that plug
Yes.
set aside.
Yes.
So
Help me grow.
at the same time that my son was going through all of these diagnostic things, the preschool was like, hey, we just want to like maximize our resources. They use the Center for Inclusive Childcare, which is a fantastic resource. But they also were like, let's contact Help Me Grow. And I was like, ugh. Yeah, I literally had a bad attitude right out of the gate. And like, I apologize. Help Me Grow is a great resource for so many different families, and depending on who you get, again, as Jennifer was saying, like sometimes you get just like the most amazing person. I've worked with really amazing people through Help Me Grow or through like the school district for early childhood special education. So like I'm not saying it's a bad option. I'm just saying sometimes you have a bad experience, and that's what we had. So they called them and we set up, it's kind of like a screening, like your kid will go in, kind of the screening that you do like before they enter kindergarten, just to like take a look at them, like a nurse would, and then take a look at them cognitive wise, like do they know their letters, their shapes, their colors, stuff like that. My son couldn't even sit in a chair to take the test. So he failed the test because he couldn't take the test because of all of these challenges he was having at the time. And I kept telling them like, hey, well, you know, we're getting like right now we're in the process of being assessed for ADHD and in the process of getting assessed for autism, like, but you know, they won't have any of that. They're not going to accept anything from anywhere else. They're going to do their own thing. And so he went through that assessment, and then they came back with a developmental delay. That's what we see. It's DD. I was like, okay, whatever helps him get support. I don't care. So they give him that label. In the meantime, we're getting these diagnoses.
Right.
But you know, you would have to demand every assessment to have them included, and I didn't know that because there's no communication. So he then this happened in the winter of when he was 3. By the time spring came, and this is Ramsey County, by the time spring came, we finally got our first IEP created. So no services yet, just assessments and talking and all of that stuff.
And you're supposed to get it within 2 weeks.
Yeah, so between
you know.
between like contacting them and being like, hey, we have a kid that needs some help, and getting the IEP, it took from winter to spring, and then nothing happened because they went on summer break. Meanwhile, my child is still having challenges in preschool. Then the fall comes and we have to do a new assessment because he's a different kid now. And I was like, hey, we moved to a new house, which is the worst, because then we had to reapply.
Yep.
And then I was like, hey, we have these medical diagnoses. Here's the diagnostic paperwork. And they were like, okay, not reflective on his IEP.
No.
Doesn't count. But again, no one communicated to me that I could demand a reassessment to get it to count. So I didn't know. I just thought we were stuck. So then, then that takes from the fall of late summer, right? Because it wasn't even fall. It was late summer when I contacted them. And then it took until December, January for him to start receiving services. And then it was one 45-minute visit from an occupational therapist per week. and what she was providing, I'm not saying that what she was providing was bad. What I'm saying is that what the staff at the time was providing him and what they gained from the Center for Inclusive Childcare was far more conducive than what she was bringing to. If anything, when she would come in, she would be more disruptive.
Right.
Because she was using practices that was in opposition to sort of the Montessori philosophy, which like is kind of a chill environment compared to like some more daycare settings.
Great.
So that was our experience, and then that just kind of rocked out, and then the summer came, they took their break again, and then at that point I was like, we're just not. And that was a conversation I had with his preschool, and we just decided that it was not in his best interest to continue with those services. But then once we started at Spiro, we that was the most up-to-date IEP was the one we entered in with.
Yeah.
And he was 4 when we denied services, and he was 6 when he started kindergarten. So it was grossly outdated.
Yeah.
But thankfully Spiro is like just a couple of rock stars.
Right.
And they know how to handle just about anything. So it's all been squared away. But that early childhood special education can look like that for a lot of families.
Oh.
I've also had where like in the classroom setting where I was teaching for a little bit, there was a child who needed supports. They reached out. Within a month, the assessment was done. He qualified for like 2-hour-long OT visits. And the woman who came, Andrea, she was lovely. She was so calm, so like mindful of the greater environment, and then gave this child such lovely support and really truly made a difference for this child this was a toddler room that I taught in. So like we're talking 2 years old.
Yeah.
And then when that child phased out of the classroom and ended up going to a daycare facility and then or just at home for a bit, she was able to go and do in-home services too.
Yeah. Which
is great for a lot of families.
Yeah, I mean, our experience with Henry with Help Me Grow was positive. Like some of the parts of the assessment surprised us, including the fact that like I apparently didn't realize that my child didn't know how to jump, and I was so fixated on years on this silly thing. But anyway, but they'd come in. I think he received 2 visits a week for speech, and pretty nonverbal till like 4. 4 was still gibberish and like random words here and there. Some of my favorite videos, but because he had his like own little made up language. But he received services, and it was fine. Like we had fun. We'd play outside, and she'd like teach little tips and tricks here and there. But I feel like for me, the only reason it wasn't more than what I took out of it was because I had already been through over a decade of speech work with his older brother.
Yeah, right.
So I'm coming into it knowledgeable in a different way, because his older brother had verbal apraxia. It's a much different situation. Very controversial in the speech realm of pathologists. But what we ended up doing was, once we enrolled him into daycare, because he went there temporarily until he was off a wait list to get into the ABA place he went to, she followed him there, and honestly, like, they loved the support. They really did. It's just, for me, it felt like we were hanging out.
Yeah.
And we were talking.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't really feel like Henry benefited, because it was very like this is the time in our day. Like, it was very focused attention.
Yes.
So
So
that
not
was
a waste of
helpful.
time.
No, not at all.
You just didn't get new tools for your toolbox.
Yeah.
but he did.
Yes,
He gained something from it.
absolutely.
But I think, when you're a parent and you're trying to make these choices and like weigh the pros and cons, because sometimes there can be a lot of things to do at once and then not enough things to do.
Absolutely.
And I think that you can get overwhelmed really quickly with the like, well, I feel like I have to do it all because my kid needs.
Right.
My kid needs.
Right.
Just with a capital NEEDS.
Burnout is real.
Yes.
That's a different episode. Burnout is real.
And I think that it was like such a difficult decision to be like, I don't want these services anymore because they're not actually giving him the support that he needs right now. And it seems like there's a conflict between the school and the person coming in to give support. And that was its own thing, but know that like it's all about figuring out what's best going to support your kid, and sometimes that's going to involve you saying this support is not supporting, or it's not doing what I need it to do, because we keep getting we on our like list of recommendations is PCIT, parent child interactive therapy, something like that. And I've looked it up. It seems like a great resource. Our family's never chosen it. And it's mainly because, and I've talked to a number of people about this who know me very well and know my kid very well, I just kept asking, what will I gain? What will he gain? And it wasn't anything new.
Fair.
And it wasn't anything that would carve specific time that we weren't already doing. Because this like PCIT is like how to help parents and caregivers interact with their child, basically, and how to help shift your perspective of what their challenges are and how to best support them in the event of a meltdown, a sensory overload, how to help communicate and do many different kinds of prompts, like a verbal prompt, a physical prompt, a visual prompt, all of those things, right? And these were things I already knew.
And this actually, a little light turned on in my head, would be a great resource. You say parents and caregivers, great resource for grandparents.
Yes.
Say you're struggling having help with your grandparents or aunts and uncles, or maybe you're really close with the neighbor and they watch your kids all the time. Like, it's not limited to just the parents. Same with Help Me Grow. Like, there were times where the speech pathologist that came to our house helped the two boys interact together and bring their communication together. So like it may feel like your knowledge could be further than what they're able to provide, but that doesn't mean that someone in your family couldn't benefit from it either. Had her first eval through Help Me Grow at 6 months because she wasn't holding her body up, she wasn't crawling, she wasn't able to load on her knees. We had some stuff going on, but she was receiving PT services. We had a referral for OT, and she was on a wait list for speech a couple months after that. And our Help Me Grow eval only qualified her for speech services because she wasn't babbling or anything like that. But they said that she does not qualify for PT and she didn't qualify for OT.
Even though she did in like the medical field.
Even though we were actively receiving services in the medical field. So school criteria is different. It is. So even if your suspicion isn't being met by these organizations that are there to offer support, it might be that you're like some of our kiddos where they're just they're in the middle, right? They're not showing big enough developmental delays. Thank you.
Delays.
But
it's also range, like developmentally for movement and for language. I mean, unless you have like a really specific reflex where like your a reflex isn't presenting itself, or it's not integrating, or it's not dropping off like it's supposed to. Movement development and even language development has such a wide range of when it could start.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pass the like that, what I don't want to say average, but there's like a range that you will see children start to present certain milestones and skills. And once you pass that range, that typical range, that's when suddenly you're like, oh, well, now I'm kind of worried because this isn't happening. And you start pursuing options, medical options.
But yeah, like, and nothing, I don't want people to hear this and be like, well, is Help Me Grow beneficial? Is it not beneficial? It is.
Yeah,
it completely is. And they can open up resources. They can be a really great, like, first initial stepping stone of the process.
Yes, and sometimes can move quite quicker than the medical process, because to get on a wait list for a medical evaluation to see if there's something going on with your child can be anywhere from, 6 months is like, woohoo, you found the right place.
Right.
But really, it's 12 months to a year and a half for a lot of places. And that's just because the demand is so high.
Right.
And then there's staffing, right? Because there's only certain days they can do these evaluations because other clinic hours are reserved for other things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you are a parent and you're starting off on this journey, we recommend finding a medical option, talking to your pediatrician. They can refer you if that's what you need. If your pediatrician is telling you no, because you might have one of those.
Yes.
I've heard of them, and I've heard of them caring for children who then later got a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So just because your pediatrician is dismissing your concerns and saying, I don't think this is an issue here, get a second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're like, I continue to hear from the daycare, from someone who keeps being like, my child who is autistic used to do that too. If you like, that's our code. That's our code when we're trying to suss out if, like, hey, is your kid on the spectrum as well? Like, we'll say things like, oh yeah, my kid used to do that all the time when he was that age, and that's our way of being like, gosh, like we don't know how to say, like,
talk about it.
Hey.
Yeah, but like if the medical direction feels big and scary, or if you feel like we're not there yet, right? Because sometimes you have to get over your own hurdles, because sometimes those are in the way, right?
I'm going to acknowledge that is a thing.
It is a thing. And say you start on the educational side of things, and say Help Me Grow is like, hey, we have some resources, your child does qualify for X, Y, and Z. They'll create you a individualized family service plan, or IFSP, which they will give you within 2 weeks. Girl. And if they don't give it to you within 2 weeks,
apparently you can go knock on their door and be like, where it at? But I didn't do that because no one tells you this.
Yep.
Like,
nope. They got 2 weeks to give it to you. So the IFSP will just lay out like plans and goals and things to work on, and you can just bring that straight to your pediatrician and say, hey, the school created this, and that could be a great bridge to open up the conversation medically, because if you only stick to the schools,
it's only a fraction of the support you'll get.
It's only a fraction, and
it's only while they're enrolled in school.
Yep.
The second they're no longer enrolled in school, all of that support, all of that acknowledgement, all of those diagnoses, and I'm making little bunny ears, that the diagnoses that they said, go away.
And it's not, if you want to be the best advocate for your child and want to be able to fight and make sure the let's see my fancy little paper over here. If you want to make sure the school district and the state statutes and rules and the federal regulations are all being followed for your child in a school setting, you need to make sure you have more than just the school on your side.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say. because just
So
like
you're
anything,
saying, like, if you're gonna build a team,
if you're going to build a team,
right?
mm-hmm.
Only inviting one member to be a part of your team is what you get then.
It's what you get, and they may not show up sometimes.
And they may not show up. They may come at, oh girl. Shout out to my BFF ride or die. She legit had someone at her son's school, a teacher who she was in constant fight mode with, right? Said out his mouth how much he didn't believe that he's like, oh, your child's distracted, and she's like, yeah, because he has ADHD, and he's like, yeah, but he can, like, that shouldn't be a problem. That shouldn't be an obstacle. That's not a thing.
Another future episode, ADHD is more than what you think it is. Period. Anyway, sorry.
But he did a whole, and this is her story to tell, which I believe we'll invite her onto the episode to talk about. Yeah. But like, she had constant fights with this school, with the teacher, and with this district, with them just like making simple adaptations,
the simplest,
for her child to be successful in the classroom, and because, in many ways, because the only member of her team that she had at the time was the school. But then best believe she contacted Pacer, and now you got someone else on your team. She reached out to us as in friendship, with the advocacy and consultation in mind, and we came in and said, absolutely not.
Right.
No, you are not alone in this. So in that small way, she gathered her team. And what we're telling you is that when your child, even when they're 3 years old, you start to build your team.
Yes.
You get a medical team, you get a therapy team, whether that's speech, OT, behavioral, physical, whatever it may be. You get all those people on your team. You get county services, you get SMART certified, you get waivers, you get whatever it is that helps you build the strongest team for your child as possible. Yes. With the goal of that support system staying there past adolescence.
Yeah, and just like anything, more people will show up for you. More people will show up for your child if you have the more concrete people on your team. We're not poo-pooing on education.
No. But it's just a fraction of the situation.
Yep.
And I think that's where people get really frustrated, like, oh, well, the school's failing my child. Like, well, you're probably not wrong. But there's probably schools out there that actually rally and succeed your child too.
Right.
And that may not be your story, that the school is failing your child. But if there's something going on with your school district, or with your school in particular, with a teacher in particular, when you run into that obstacle, you have the rest of your team to step in and be like, actually, no.
Right.
And like, for a small, that, and in our next episode, we're going to talk about special education, IEPs, 504s, all of that stuff for like kindergarten on up. Right now, we're just sort of focused on birth to age 6, really. But like, for instance, my 4-year-old who is doing this behavioral plan that we've put together very recently, I wouldn't have been able to craft this behavioral plan as well as I could have had I not had an occupational therapist that he's been seeing take a look at it. Like, hey, can you take a look at this behavioral plan? Tell me what you see. And so their original behavioral plan that they created, it wasn't bad, it just was incomplete.
Yeah.
And so she took a look at it and went, well, the goals, like, you're asking a lot for the goals, and you're, it seems kind of vague and kind of like just in paragraph form. It's not an easy thing to read and adapt. And so I went, I agree. Here's how I'm thinking about structuring it. My sister said, hey, that looks really great. And then I did the work and showed it to Megan, our occupational therapist, and she took a look at it and like gave some suggestions and was like, wow, this is really great and comprehensive. And then you send it back to the school and you wait for the school to respond. Which, they got,
that's how Everybody sees
they got a long list of things they got to do, and you want to be the priority. I get that because, communication's quick when it's them communicating the problem to you. And so you just anyway, it's a waiting game sometimes. But it's a good behavioral plan. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without at least one other person on my team taking a look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Help Me Grow can be a fantastic resource, a free resource.
And use it. Even, like I said, even if you feel like it's not benefiting your knowledge and what you can provide for your child, someone in your family can benefit from it.
Yes, absolutely. Or even if it's just hey, now you've met this person, she shows up to your house or she shows up at the daycare, you have direct communication with her. Even if it's all going wackadoodle-doodle and you're I'm questioning whether or not this was good because I'm not sure I got a good one, you can still ask them questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, who do you recommend for this? Hey, since you go and see my child for occupational therapy, how would I get occupational therapy outside of you? What does that look like? Right. Which will be another episode. Because occupational therapy you can get. You don't need a referral. You don't need a medical diagnosis. You can just go to a clinic and say, I have some concerns. I'd like you to do an eval. And they'll do an eval. And you will pay out of pocket for those services.
And I want to shout out to it. Please do.
Depending on what.
We're certainly not know-it-alls, even though we're Catholic.
But your insurance probably won't cover it without a diagnosis.
And we are here to have a conversation.
And that's what we ran
into. It's a two-way street.
Oh, you're
if you disagree with us, disagree with us. If you have more to add, please just be an adult.
And I remember being on the phone with them about it. But
kindness. You can be kind and also say what we're saying.
Team building.
Some of those are the best conversations. Because someone's going to show up.
But,
there's always going to be a waiting list.
But if you come up into our DMs with some hate bullshit, we'll just straight up ignore you and block you.
The more people you stack in your corner.
Put that out there as well.
The more resources more resources.
Anyway, so that's our episode for today.
More ideas.
And on the next one, we'll expand into the school age kids, like we said before.
Talk about IDEA, talk about 504s, talk about IEPs.
And the differences, and the pros and the cons, and the trials and the heartaches.
And pulling in the people to help you.
Yes, and again, talking about that, building that team. So until then, stay warm, stay cozy, show up for your kids.
Well,
be a good advocate out in the world.
Fix the system. Make it better.
Goodness, yeah, and
but also make it person-centered.
So take breaks.
None of this is
hydrate.
person-centered.
How about this? Wind change it and update it.
Doesn't have to
make it easy for all of us to learn it and be able to apply it.
Because we are not the experts in the field.
No, we're not.
And some of the stuff,
till then,
as disgusting as it feels to say out loud, is true. It's not user-friendly. It's not made for us to figure out the whole system to get all the resources possibly available. That's not real life.
No.
If you were to call a place and say, hey, my kid apparently needs help with their speech, what do I do? Versus hey, some of our motor planning stuff isn't going well, and you're giving some of the words that have been given to you, whether it's from Help Me Grow or from a different facility or from the medical team, and then you're going to ask for these other things and you have a little bit more to say, they're more likely going to give you more information than the person that's just what do I do now? Because they're going to give you just the basic, oh, you should have a social worker. But if I were to have continued my conversation, go, oh, you're saying my daughter doesn't qualify for this? Okay. Versus going, this isn't right, I'm being told this, and whether you maybe you just don't know on your end of the phone call. Maybe it's a new system, so they're just telling you it's not typing in correctly. Whatever the case may be, more people ask the questions. Learn.
You know what really helped me too is just writing it down. I did 2 different documents. I just wrote down Help Me Grow, and I would write down what it is and what it's doing for me. or for my child.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a timeline. Like, I created this timeline because I was so confused. And when you engage with someone new, they don't communicate with each other. So you like suddenly be like, well, when was the speech assessment? And you're like, it was at this place at this time. And so I made a timeline where it was like January 2022, speech assessment through the Woodbury Fairview Clinic. And then the results were, speech recommended, and then wait time is 4 to 6 months. And so, like, I would write out in a timeline like that. I still have it, like the first 4 years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
I just created this timeline of this particular journey for him.
Sure.
And it was extremely helpful just to have on hand. So then, it's like going into a doctor as a
when was
your first day of your last period, and you're like,
don't forget that.
No,
I just filled out when was the first time she sat up on her own, when was the first time she crawled,
That's
when was the
another
first time,
one.
and I'm like, can I have a cheat sheet somewhere that I like? Am I a terrible mom for saying that? But like, I need a cheat sheet. I can't keep them all.
No. We're into 55 minutes, so we could probably. So to sum up today's rant in the form of an episode, when you have a child between the ages of birth and 6, or like before they're enrolled in kindergarten, there are ways people in your community, whether it's yourself, a medical provider, a daycare person, a preschool educator, like someone in the life of your child may speak up and say, hey, I'm curious about your kid. We should take the next steps and taking a closer look. And Help Me Grow can be a great resource for that here in the state of Minnesota. I don't know what other states do, honestly. Help Me Grow is definitely like a Minnesota-specific thing.
The go-to,
I almost thought you were going to call it the GOAT, and I was like, that's too high a praise.
Yeah, I mean, it is. But like, even if it's your gut, you don't have to have a referral. Even if your gut is just telling
you can go onto helpmegrow.com and be like, refer your child, and you just type in their information, and then they will contact you within a certain amount of time and start the process. Like, you don't need your medical doctor to do that.
And no matter what, every child goes through the process at the age of 3
or 4,
for their assessment for
screening
for kindergarten.
Yeah. And so if you've made it to that point and your child hasn't raised any concerns anywhere, or maybe they have and you just haven't moved forward with anything, they'll get kind of filtered through that. Yeah,
so they'll have the resources. They'll create you a individualized family service plan, and if that's your ticket to opening up the conversation with other resources, other people in your life, take it and use it. Use it as your crutch, because it can be a very big, crazy world to try to figure out all the information when you're starting out, and it's intimidating. It's lonely.
You feel like you're in jello. I think we made a post about that. Like, you just, like, you're in the state where you feel like you can't think, you can't move, you're low energy, and like it feels like you're moving through jello or molasses or something that's really like thick and sticky. And when you reach that place, that's when you reach out to your people. Hopefully it's some people. We'll be your people. If you ain't got nobody, reach out to us. We'll be your people.
Someone tells you something crazy,
tell us, and we'll tell you you're not crazy.
Absolutely. We've heard it. We've heard things.
We've really heard some things. But as always, if you have a story you want to share, if you have comments you would like to comment, please interact with us on our Facebook page.
Information.
Oh, if you got information, if you're like, girls, you did that all wrong, I love X, Y, and Z, and I want to shout out to it, like, please do. Like, we're certainly not know-it-alls, even though we're Capricorns. We're not know-it-alls, and we are here to have a conversation, which means it's a two-way street. So if you disagree with us, please disagree with us. If you have more to add, please, just be, an adult again about it. Like, kindness. You can be kind and also say what we're saying is wrong.
Well, some of those are the best conversations.
I would agree with that. But anyway, but if you come up into our DMs with some hate bullshit, we'll just straight up ignore you and block you. So We'll just put that out there as well. Anyway, so that's our episode for today. And on the next one, we'll expand into the school age kids, like we said before.
Talk about IDEA, talk about 504s, talk about IEPs.
And the differences and the pros and the cons and the trials and
the
heartaches.
And pulling in the people to help you.
Yes, and again, talking about that, building that team. So until then, stay warm, stay cozy, show up for your kids. Be a good advocate out in the world.
And give yourself some grace.
Give yourself
You're
some grace.
You're doing what you can.
Yeah, my goodness, yeah. And, it's a marathon. So take breaks, hydrate.
Replenish your reserves.
And pull in your team. Your team doesn't have to all be professionals. They can be just support systems too. Yeah. Friends and advocates that are just in your corner. Like, make sure you're pulling them in too. So, till then. This is Jessica.
And this is Jennifer.
And this was the Behavioral Plan
Podcast.
Every time, we'll never do it right.
Gotta thank the universe for all that I receive. Anything is possible if you just believe. I've been manifesting money. You know I got receipts. I attract abundances and no